and Russia's military continues to claim it's stopped a cross-border attack from Kyiv. Moscow says forces killed more than 70 Ukrainian saboteurs when they attempted to cross into the Belgorod region. Let's talk about it in more detail with Major General Rupert Jones, former senior British Army officer. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What do you think's gone on there, then?
Well, I mean, inevitably there's a degree of confusion, claims and counterclaims. But it appears that two Russian pro-Ukrainian partisan groups have conducted some kind of incursion into the area of Belgorod. Talk of 4 villages having been taken. The Russians claiming now to have defeated that attack, and that is probably the case, but it'll take time to verify it. So that appears to be what's happened. Of course, what's interesting is what it all means. And I suppose there's probably 3 bits to that. I mean, from a Russian perspective, it points to an internal security problem. It's humiliating for them that it's an attack onto their own soil. From a Western point of view, it will cause some concern. To what degree was Ukraine supportive of that incursion? When we're giving weapons, we're concerned about those weapons being used into Russia. So there'll be some diplomatic concerns. I guess from an Ukrainian point of view, it's appealing because it does 2 things. Firstly, it draws attention away from what is or isn't happening in Bakhmut. It takes the eyes away. Have Russia taken Bakhmut once and for all? But also, we continue to assume the Ukrainians are getting ready for their big offensive. And that being the case, they'll want to draw the Russians' eye away from where that attack might come.
What does it mean for Putin? Putin, when he took his country into the war, had said that he was doing that as a matter of self-defence because they were worried about what Ukraine was going to do. It would appear that he can't keep his people safe.
Absolutely so. I mean, I think we've recognised all along that there is a minority. How big is that minority? Maybe even a majority who don't support the war. It's very hard to get really accurate figures on that. But this is a really clear example of those who don't support the war taking action into their own hands. A very brave move.
Talk to me about what, in your opinion, has happened in Bakhmut. I mean, it's been an absolute meat grinder there for more than a year. What would a victory look like, and to whom?
Well, indeed. So Prigozhin, who heads up the Wagner Group, has said over the last couple of days that Bakhmut has finally been taken, and indeed that he is going to hand over Bakhmut to the Russian army, take his own forces back out of the line to reconstitute for 2 months. That in itself is telling, because in military parlance, it tells you his forces culminated. They've got no more fight in them. They've got to come out of the line. The Ukrainians are denying that Bakhmut has completely fallen. Discuss what does it actually mean for Bakhmut to have been taken or not to be taken. It looks as though Ukraine still hold a small area in the west of the town, but critically, it also appears that they're still advancing around the sides of Bakhmut, attacking the Russians from the north and the south, and indeed attacking their supply lines behind. But I think the very fact we're having this conversation points to what we've always said, that Bakhmut as a town is not that significant. And so, you don't get this big moment where the Russians have taken it or the Ukrainians have taken it. And so it feels a fairly hollow win, if indeed it turns into a win.
But why waste so many lives with symbolism?
Well, indeed. Well, for the Russians, I think it's always about symbolism. Putin, the Russian culture is very much about symbolism. And of course, they've had a pretty awful war so far. They haven't had any victories. And we've just been talking about the Russian people. They need some victory. They need some good news. And Bakhmut became symbolic from that point of view. From a Ukrainian point of view, you don't want to give the Russians that win, but critically, it has been an opportunity to really, really wear down the Russian military. Huge amounts of Russian casualties there.
Well, the same on both sides.
Indeed so, but by way of ratio, many, many more for the Russians. I mean, the Americans have given a figure a month or so ago of 100,000 Russian casualties in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians, I think the figure is about a factor of 1 to 6 ratio of casualties between the Ukrainians and the Russians. That is still a very significant loss for the Ukrainians, but I think they've made a strategic judgment that is in their interest to really grind down the Russians in Bakhmut while they prepare for an offensive when they're ready for it.
And where do you think we are on this spring offensive that we keep hearing so much about? We were expecting it in March, then April, then May. We're almost in June. I suppose the Russians are potentially thinking it's not coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be wrong to think that. I suspect privately they know it is coming. They're very, very much, ready for it. Exactly when it comes is hard to tell. And of course, Ukraine will want to keep us, and indeed, much more importantly, the Russians, guessing about that. They won't go until they're absolutely ready, and as ready as they can be. And they'll be taking advice from the West about that, about when they've got the most amount of Western equipment, capability ready to take into the fight. And when it comes, I don't think we should expect it to be a big all-in moment, because what an offensive this typically looks like is they'll probably attack in different directions and try and get the Russians guessing, moving their reserves hither and then thither, so that they can then break through this strong crust of Russian defences.
But this war is set to continue for some time, one would anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never one for sort of putting time frames on it, but yes, look at it, this year it's been stable, hasn't it? Brutal, huge casualties, but there hasn't been a lot of movement in the front line for 5 months or so now. So even if the Ukrainians break through the front line, gain some real momentum into their counteroffensive, the war is not in. The end is not imminent.
Not least because we know, although President Zelensky has been successful in trying to get hold of some F-16s, that's a long time process.
It is, and we've discussed before. Why did the West take so long to make that decision? It was a little bit like the tanks. We're not giving tanks. We're not giving tanks. We're giving tanks. We've had the same with F-16s. I think it's fantastic that the decision has now been taken. There's a little training coalition developing. Some people are saying that there could be F-16s available in Ukraine by the autumn. I think it'll take time for that to really clarify. My air power colleagues, the purists amongst them would say it takes a very long time to train a pilot to develop an air power capability. What the Ukrainians have demonstrated is that they're artists of innovation.
Okay.
And so they'll need the limited amount of training, and they'll get the aircraft into the fight.
We're thrilled you're back from holiday. We've missed you. Thanks for joining us.
An absolute pleasure.
Thanks a lot.